Today we're going to go through the best settings for the MSI MAG 274QPF X30MV. This is their 27-inch 1440p 300Hz Mini LED monitor. So we'll set the screen up for both SDR and HDR usage. To start with, we've got the screen at its default settings, and we're going to start with the SDR setup first of all. The first thing we'll do is in the main menu, we're going to come to the professional section and we're going to change out of the Eco Pro mode, which is designed for energy saving, and we're going to use the user preset mode to start with. Now you've got a few different options depending on your usage here. You've got different options within the Pro mode menu here, and you've also got some other presets within the game mode. Now they could just as easily all be in one menu, they've just been split up here into two sections, but whichever option you enable last will be your active preset mode. So we prefer to use the modes in the Pro mode menu. You've got a choice then depending on the color space that you want to work with. The user mode will operate with the full native wide gamut of the panel and give you the most saturated and vivid image that I think a lot of people will prefer for gaming and multimedia. But if you've got the need to work with specific target color spaces, you can also use things like the sRGB emulation mode, Adobe RGB emulation, or display P3 modes if you prefer. We'll start by setting the screen up in the user mode with the full native color space. So we'll select user mode there, and then in the image section, you can adjust the brightness to whatever you find comfortable for your ambient lighting conditions and your user preferences. A low setting of 6 would give you a luminance of around 120 nits, but increase that to whatever you find comfortable for your usage, as we say. Contrast can stay on 70, the default, sharpness on 0. Color temperature, we're actually going to move out of the normal mode and to the customization mode, where we've now got access to the RGB channels, and we're going to make a couple of tweaks here. We're going to move red down to 48, green we'll leave at 50, and blue will move up to 53. We found that delivered a better white point and a better color balance closer to the 6500K target that we use. So we'll use the customization mode there. We'll come back to the display HDR mode in a moment. The brightness uniformity setting, you might want to enable that. It doesn't make a huge difference to overall panel luminance, but it may help reduce any kind of vignetting effect that you see towards the edges of the screen where they may become a little bit darker. I didn't see any drawbacks with using that mode, so you might as well enable it. If you do come across any compatibility issues with other settings and things, you can always disable it, but it seemed to work most of the time anyway. Now for SDR usage, the local dimming setting, we'd recommend leaving this turned off for any kind of normal static desktop applications and usage. It causes too much gamma shift and color temperature shift to be useful in those situations, but it could be useful if you want to use the setting for SDR gaming, SDR movies, multimedia, that kind of thing. And if you do, you can just enable that from within the image section, local dimming. You can experiment with the different levels, but we found level 3 delivered the best overall contrast, certainly the deepest blacks and the best dimming levels. So we probably recommend using level 3 if you're going to use that for kind of SDR, multimedia and gaming. The customization option you could also use as well, that allows you to tweak things between the maximum 255, that's level 3, and any of the other modes, but we think level 3 is likely to be preferable just for most people anyway. So turn it on for SDR gaming if you want to experiment, that will help improve contrast and dimming, but leave it turned off for general static desktop applications and that kind of thing. The other preset option that some people might want to use is the sRGB emulation mode. That's available here, and that will clamp the color space back to the sRGB reference space much better if you want to work more accurately with sRGB content and the SDR color space. In that mode, you'll see that the color temperature is locked, as is the contrast. Again, you can adjust the brightness to whatever you find comfortable. Just set that out whatever you feel is appropriate for your usage and your ambient light conditions. There's no need to change anything else in the sRGB mode, so use that if you want to for specifically working with sRGB and SDR content. If you end up sticking to the user mode and our adjusted settings, then you may also want to check out our calibrated ICC profile. That's linked in the description below. That will clamp the color space back to sRGB for color aware applications, and we'll also do some corrections to gamma and that kind of thing. So do check that out if you want to try that as well. A couple of other settings that you may want to do in SDR, you could of course play with any of the gaming settings, the crosshair, the optic scope and so on. We probably wouldn't recommend using the night vision setting. We found that it does increase near black detail and raise the brightness of darker shades, but it does at the same time seem to raise black, so it's probably not a great idea to turn that on, and we found shadow detail to actually be very good anyway. The response time setting, this is quite important for optimizing the pixel response time behavior. Leave that on the default fast mode. We found that optimal, especially in VRR situations and for lower refresh rate devices like 60 Hz and 120 Hz inputs. If you were only gaming without VRR and at the maximum refresh rate of 300 Hz, you could experiment with the fastest mode. That does improve things ever so slightly, but it does introduce more overshoot in VRR situations as the frame rate lowers. So we think fast is the best balance between response times and overshoot. You can also enable adaptive sync here if you want to use variable refresh rates, G-Sync and FreeSync and that kind of thing. And another option that you may want to choose to use for gaming is the MPRT mode. Now you can't use that at the same time as variable refresh rates, but you can use it at various fixed refresh rates. Check out our review if you want to know loads more about how that operates and what it does, but that can be enabled quickly and easily here in the gaming menu, and that will help improve motion clarity in certain gaming situations. The other setting you might want to change is in the gaming menu, the HDMI setting. If you're going to connect a console and you want to use that over HDMI, you might want to switch this over to the console mode here. We found that was what opened up the support for 4K 120 Hz from a console, so just change that setting if you're going to use this for console gaming. In the settings menu, you might also want to enable HDMI CEC here. That will just auto switch over to the HDMI input when it detects an HDMI device is powered on. So that could be useful if you've got a console connected as well as a PC and that kind of thing. We've turned Windows HDR on now as well, and you'll see that the menu now reports HDR is turned on. As a reminder, we'd recommend only enabling HDR in Windows when you're going to view actual HDR content. Otherwise, leave it turned off for general usage and SDR applications. In HDR mode, some of the settings are now unavailable. You'll see they're kind of grayed out. It's probably best just to leave the professional mode on the user profile. The others don't seem to do much anyway, other than some minor tweaks to sharpness and color temperature, but we found the user to be the optimal. In the image section, the only things you might want to look at would be the display HDR mode. You've got a choice between 1000 nits and 400 nits. Now they actually get much brighter than that in both of the modes, but the 1000 nits will certainly give you the more impactful and brighter HDR experience. So we think most people want to stick to that mode. But if you find it too bright for close-up viewing positions or certain usage, you can always drop down to the 400 nits mode, which still is very bright. It's just it might be a bit more comfortable in those scenarios. So we'll leave that on the 1000 nits mode. Local dimming, you can see, will default to level 3 for HDR. You can adjust this. It does vary the brightness somewhat in certain situations, but the level 3 mode gives you the highest contrast across the screen, the deepest blacks, and we think that gives the best dimming performance. So we probably leave that on level 3 for HDR. You can tweak the halo dimming setting. It's on the default 100, but you can turn that down if you want. All that will do is increase the brightness of some small highlights in certain situations, but it might introduce a bit more haloing and blooming around objects. It doesn't seem to make a huge difference, so you can play around with that if you want to, but we think most people will probably just want to leave that at the default 100 setting anyway. So there you go, there's the screen setup for both SDR and HDR usage. You can check out our full review of this screen linked in the description below, as well as the link to the calibrated ICC profile if you want to check that out. Do give us a like if you found this video useful, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you want to stay up to date on all of our latest monitor reviews, news and other information. Thank you for watching. We'll catch you next time.